The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and good afternoon, and thank you for calling in to our informational webinar on the FY22 Coping with Drought LOI review. My name is Britt Parker, and I'm the manager of this grant competition. I'm also joined by Meredith Muth, who will be working with me on the competition. If you have any issues with audio or accessing the webinar, please do type those into the question box. In addition, if you have questions as we go along, please type those in as well, and I will pause a couple times during the webinar for those questions. Before I give an overview of the webinar today, I just wanted to thank all of you who took the time to develop and submit an LOI. We saw some really great and innovative ideas and appreciate your time and energy. I also want to set expectations for this webinar. We want to use this time to clarify your feedback, our feedback, and dig a bit deeper into it generally to help inform your next steps. What we will not be doing today is answering specific questions about your LOI and project idea. If after today you still have questions, you're welcome to reach out to schedule a 15-minute meeting with me next week. But even in the one-on-one discussions, we'll focus on review of the relevance of your LOI to the funding call. So today I'm going to rehash the FY22 Coping with Drought competition focus, take a look at the LOI by the numbers, and then we'll dig into the general feedback we provided, pause for clarifying questions, and then I'll end with a couple slides on the full proposal and take questions on that process as well. We understand that GoToWebinar platform and the question box is somewhat limiting in terms of our ability to ask follow-up questions, but it's the cleanest platform for recording the webinar and to share it with those who can't join us, so we appreciate your understanding. Again, please feel free to enter your questions at any time. As a reminder, the focus of the FY22 Coping with Drought Ecological Drought competition is research to improve our understanding, early warning, and management of drought risk in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems to inform more deliberate and expanded decision-making that supports sustainable, healthy, and resilient ecosystems. And we focused some of the example research questions under two themes. One is improving our ability to understand drought impacts to ecosystems and ecologically available water and integrating that information into decision-making. And the other theme was integrating ecologically relevant information to support drought monitoring, planning, and action. Now I want to take a few minutes to highlight the guidelines for applicants, and I ask you to keep referring back to these as you consider the development of a full proposal. So the first was that project funds will be awarded as cooperative agreements, thus ensuring a working partnership and substantial interaction between project PIs and the NIDIS program, NOAA scientists, and other relevant staff. Projects will be expected to submit annual reports and respond to periodic data and information requests, including quarterly calls to ensure co-production. And I just want to clarify, we've appreciated those who've reached out to try to form those close partnerships with NIDIS from the beginning, but we can't start to engage with you until funding decisions are made. So it will be at that point where funding decisions are made that our close engagement will begin. So proposals will, and will means must, include partners and decision makers from relevant sectors and communities across all levels of government. These partners should be part of an integrated project team that will contribute subject matter expertise and/or who are the beneficiaries of the results of the proposed research to ensure that the results are assimilated, utilized, and enhance planning, early warning, response, and mitigation within the NIDIS drought early warning systems after the completion of the projects. Proposals will also clearly demonstrate collaboration and partnership that will take place within the project team, and this could include representatives from the public and private sector, academia, local, regional, tribal, and federal government entities, non-governmental organizations, environmental groups, citizen groups, etc. Proposals will also demonstrate relevance to the NIDIS national and regional priorities and clearly state how outcomes could be incorporated into national or regionally regional drought early warning systems. And finally, they'll demonstrate support of diversity, equity, inclusion, and environmental justice in their proposals, not only through the required statement, but in their project teams and engagement with partners where appropriate through the proposed work. Some additional considerations for applicants include the following. Research that provides concrete applications to planning and decision-making are preferred, and this can include drought and water management, as well as other natural resource management. Preference will be given to those proposals that focus on natural systems, freshwater, coastal, wetland, grasslands, rangelands, forest ecosystems, and/or aquaculture, coastal or freshwater, and shall avoid well-studied systems such as intensive and industrial agricultural systems. Applicants should avoid single species specific projects. We encourage the consideration of future trend, climate change, land use, and population where applicable to research questions. And finally, applicants are encouraged to be aware and consider integration of research results into the regional drought early warning systems where appropriate. And strategic plans for each of our DOs are available on those pages through drought.gov. Now, let's jump into the review process. So the LOIs were reviewed based on relevance to this funding announcement, its focus and requirements. Each LOI was reviewed by at least 3 people well-versed in the purpose and scope of the funding announcement. If you receive feedback, that means that one or more of the reviewers thought your LOI was potentially deficient in one or more areas identified in the announcement. Remember, this was not a review of the quality of the proposed idea. Rather, this review focused on the fit or scope of the idea relative to the funding announcement. Based on the reviews, each LOI received one of the 4 following recommendations: strongly encouraged, encouraged with modifications, discouraged without major modifications, or strongly discouraged. Strongly encouraged means that your LOI substantively responded to all required elements as described in the funding announcement. Encouraged with modification means your LOI responded to almost all of the required elements as described in the funding announcement, but in order to be competitive at the full application stage, some attention will be needed to strengthen the response to certain requirements. Discouraged without major modifications means your LOI did not substantially respond to the required elements as described in the funding announcement, and your LOI would not be competitive at the full application stage without significant changes. And finally, strongly discouraged means your LOI was not relevant or did not substantively respond to the required elements as described in the funding announcement, and we do not think that the LOI would be competitive at the full application stage. The intent of this review, again, is on relevance and fit. There were some good ideas that came in that we just felt were outside the scope of the competition. We're trying to be respectful of your time, your partner's time, and the time of the technical experts who will serve on the panels to review the final proposals, and be honest about their relevance to this specific competition and its focus. Before we dig into the feedback, I want to give you a sense of the level of competition this year. Our total funds anticipated for the 2 years is $2 million per year for a total of $4 million, and we anticipate awarding between 6 to 7 projects with funding up to $600,000 each over the 2 years through cooperative agreements. So we received 65 LOIs that were reviewed. We outright discouraged 4. We discouraged without major modifications 24, and encouraged with modifications 24. And then 13 were strongly encouraged, meaning again that reviewers felt they really hit the mark in terms of fit. The 65 LOIs totaled a request of $30,307,000. When we compare that to the $4 million total we anticipate to be available over the 2 years, I think we can all agree that the competition is stiff, and we encourage you to really take the feedback to heart before proceeding to full proposal development. I've also broken down the total requested for each of the feedback categories, to give you a sense of the magnitude of the request that fell under each. Before we dive into the feedback, I really want to distill into 2 questions what we feel is most important as you prep or consider prepping your full proposals. Those two questions are, number one, what management or planning decision will this work impact? And number two, who are the beneficiaries of this work and how will they apply the outcomes? While we understand there's a great deal to the answer of these questions and a lot of depth, if you can't answer them, we encourage you to really consider if this competition is a good fit for your research. So upon review of the LOIs and based on the requirements of the competition, the feedback really fell into 5 categories. The first was, please consider including more information on who the beneficiaries of your work are and how they will use and apply the outcomes of your work to support planning, decision-making, etc. Now, this is really key as NIDIS funds applied research. While we recognize the necessity and benefit of fundamental research, we really focus solely on projects whose outcome have a direct impact to and hopefully improve early warning, planning, and management decisions. The second category of general feedback was, please consider how you can meaningfully engage with partners that will utilize the outcome of your research. This can include your project team and/or other types of collaboration throughout the life of your project. The transfer of findings and products from projects to the appropriate end user community is a fundamental goal for NIDIS, Coping with Drought Research Awards. While your pre-proposal may contain some of this information, it should be significantly strengthened. We understand that some of the partnerships are not fully fleshed out at the LOI stage, but this is such an integral piece of the work that NIDIS funds. We want to be very clear that to compete well, a proposal will have to address this requirement at the full proposal stage, and it will need to be very well formulated and articulated. We want to see co-production of tools, products, and decision support frameworks with those that will benefit from them. General feedback number 3 was, please consider including collaborators beyond academia. This could include public-private sector, local, regional, tribal, federal government agencies, NGOs, environmental and/or citizen groups, etc. We want to see diverse teams representing multiple disciplines, perspectives, and expertise that go beyond academic institution in any one discipline. General feedback number 4 was, please ensure that your project has a direct linkage to ecological drought. We had a number of LOIs that were honestly drought seemed like a bit of an afterthought. So nesting drought in the context of climate change is fine and is a benefit, but the primary focus does need to be ecological drought. General feedback number 5 was, please carefully consider the guidance to avoid single species specific projects in the information sheet. If a portion of the work is focused on a single species, please articulate how the work is transferable and/or how the work contributes to a greater understanding of the ecosystem as a whole or the impacts of ecological drought. Also, please remember to demonstrate relevance to the NIDIS national and regional priorities and clearly state how outcomes can be incorporated into our national and regional drought early warning systems. This too is an important piece given NIDIS's mandate to provide drought early warning for the nation and our approach to achieving this through regional drought early warning systems. For those that might not be familiar with our program, we currently have 8 DEWs in existence. And a drought early warning system, or a DEWS, utilizes new and existing networks of federal, tribal, state, local, and academic partners to make climate and drought science accessible and useful for decision makers. This feedback is important for those also working outside of our existing drought early warning systems, and that too is fine, or with a focus on one state within a DEWS or a specific community or small region. So these approaches are okay, but please articulate how the work might be transferable, scalable, and beneficial to the overall goal of our national early warning system. So I want to circle back and reiterate these 2 key questions. I really can't emphasize these enough, and they are, what management or planning decision will this work impact? And who are the beneficiaries of this work, and how will they apply the outcomes? And so at this point, I'm going to pause briefly and see if there are any questions in the question or chat box, and I'll give you a few minutes to type. And at this point, I'm not seeing any. So I'm going to go ahead and oh, here we go. Let's see. Can you speak to the geographic spread of the LOIs? Yes, I don't have the specific information or numbers in front of me, but we did have quite a nice spread of the LOIs throughout the western and central US, the southeast, and I think a few from the northeast as well. So we did have a nice geographical spread of the LOIs.
Britt, if I could also just add, there were some that were national in scope, some that were regional in scope, and some that were more focused on a, say, ecological system within a state or within a region. So
yeah.
it was spread out quite nicely.
Yes, thank you for that. The next question is, do the general feedback items apply to all LOIs, or would this have been in our letter? And yes, so the general feedback categories are kind of how what we saw again and again reading the LOIs, but the feedback that is specific to your LOI will be in that LOI feedback letter. So not all 5 of those would apply to all the LOIs. The next question is, our proposal considers drought impact of fish as well as human. Is this considered as single species? No, not necessarily. No. When we saw some very specific single species work that came in where it targeted one species of tree, one species of fish, and then from there, you know, it kind of ran the gamut, whether it was a full ecosystem type or a kind of conglomerate of fish species. But, you know, what we want to avoid is research that very specifically is single species focused. I would have to look back at your specific LOI to determine if we felt there was an issue with your particular LOI. Meredith, did you want to add anything to that on single species?
No, not at this time.
Okay. The next question is it appropriate for projects to focus on a single dues region, or should the proposal speak to multiple regions or national? So it is absolutely fine for a project to focus on a specific dues or even a state within the dues, or a specific, you know, a smaller area within a state. But we would just like to understand in your full proposal if you feel the results are transferable or scalable, or how those results we might be able to integrate into our drought early warning system, such that they improve early warning. So we just want to understand what you see as the connection, you know, to the larger dues region or to a national scale, if applicable. The next question is...
Could I add one more thing, Britt? No, I think this is a really good question, especially for people who may not be as familiar with what the drought early warning system networks are. And those are types of questions we can help you with, and there's lots online. But the end user is not necessarily the dues network, because that's what a dues is. It's an early warning system that brings together people and products and tools and information to increase resilience. But the end, again, to say the end user is the dues is probably not the detail that we're looking at. It would be certain elements of the dues that are responsible for management, decision making, et cetera, as Britt was mentioning before. Does that sound right, Britt?
Yeah, it does. And I'll just, for those again who are unfamiliar with the drought early warning system concept, I'll also say that it really involves 5 components. So let's see, monitoring, forecasting and outlooks, planning and preparedness, communication and outreach, and applied research. And obviously, this is a key piece of how we meet the applied research needs, that the needs we hear from our partners within these early warning systems. So you can also think about it that way. Like, is there a piece that contributes to better communication and outreach about, in this case, ecological drought impacts and what we might be able to do to lessen those impacts or mitigate the impacts. It might contribute in some way to improving drought monitoring. So you can think about it not only from a geographical scale, but also, or region, but also, around these 5 components. And Meredith, maybe in the chat box you could put the link to the drought.gov page about the drought early warning systems, just so people can explore a little bit more about what we're trying to do through those systems. The next question is, what level of specificity is ideal when discussing partner engagement strategies and roles of partners and beneficiaries, i.e., is giving a few examples of strategies and roles sufficient, or should these be linked to each entity specifically in the proposal? So I think that this can vary based on the project and how you're working with the beneficiaries and end users. So we want more than just kind of, and I'll use the term kind of hand wavy strategies. Like, we want some concrete engagement. We want to see that you are engaging with those who will use this information in the end throughout the project. So it doesn't mean that a partner or an end user needs to be like a co-PI per se, but we want to see that they're substantially engaged in the project throughout the life of the project, if that makes sense. And Meredith, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think this engagement strategy is a really great way to not only co-develop, but to ensure and justify that there is a demand for what you are proposing to accomplish, that there is a built-in buy-in and user. And that's why having those strategic engagements is really, really important in advance.
Yep, great. The next question is, can you explain cooperative agreement awards? Are there specific requirements for such awards? So yes, a cooperative agreement is just a type of grant that has the requirement for substantive federal involvement. So the grantor and the grantee work more closely together throughout the life of the project. And we have found over the years of the Coping with Drought competition that when we use the cooperative agreement mechanism, we're able to have a lot more engagement throughout the life of the project, and we find that the outcomes of those projects are, a lot of times more useful and usable to our stakeholders and our partners. So the only specific requirement that's different from a traditional grant is, as I stated earlier, things like we do quarterly check-ins with our PIs, and we find that usually both parties really enjoy that engagement and working together more closely throughout the grant. But it's that substantive involvement clause that is different from a traditional grant. The next question is, if regional patterns are less focused on ecological drought, but a pattern of climate in a region, example, patterns of drought combined with intense times of flooding, would that still be considered ecological drought? Let me kind of reread that question. So it's fine if the patterns of climate across a region are more tied to flooding or some other, increased precipitation, or, more based on higher temperatures or more extremes. But, you have to make a linkage back to ecological drought in order for this to fit this competition. So there has to be that linkage between.
Britt, may I add one more thing? Robert, if I understand your question correctly, maybe this also could be interpreted as, you might have a region that may just be prone to floods as well as droughts, which we're increasingly seeing. And that means that management practices is increasingly focused on managing multiple hazards, both too much and too little water. And that's perfectly okay, as long as this links back to strengthening the information to help on the drought side.
Yeah, thank you for that. The last question I see at this point, oh, there's another one. The next to last question, does a co-PI, for example, a federal employee who does not request funding himself or herself, but substantially contributes to the project and co-supervises the postdoc, need to submit an application for the same project? So a federal employee needs to submit a separate application for the same project if they or the federal institution in which they sit will receive money. If there's no transfer of money to, let's just say it's a USGS center, okay? If there's a PI from the USGS who sits at that center, but no transfer of money occurs, then no, they do not need to put in a separate application. But if there is money flowing to a federal entity, then yes, they need to submit a separate application for the same project. And hopefully that makes sense, but do follow up in the QA box if that does not. The next question is for project outcomes that include a tool or product that has a stated use, and how important is it that we identify these projects will So for project outcomes that include a tool or product that has a stated use, how important is it that we identify what these products will specifically include and their use in great detail? So if you're developing a tool or a product, I think it is very important that you include what they are to be used for and how, and by whom. And then, as we've said before, include those end users in the co-development and co-production of that product.
Yeah, and to that end, what you may not have all the specifics of is what exactly that tool or product will include. And I know that that's something you mentioned, Michael, there, because that might be modified or informed by the engagement process and user feedback. It depends on what stage you are in your development, of course, and every project will be different. But there may be situations, depending on your project, where there is an expectation that you would have a lot more detail, recognizing that feedback through a certain co-development process may modify certain components over time. That's okay as well. We know that that happens, and that's a natural part of project development.
Yep.
But to just say we will figure out what this tool will be after we talk to people, that's probably not going to score very highly either. So you just need to find that right balance.
Very good. The next question, do specific NOAA, NIDIS, or DEWS personnel need to be collaborators, even if they're not co-PIs? Or can all the proposed end users not be formally affiliated with NOAA, NIDIS, or the DEWS? So from the perspective of the cooperative agreement and the engagement with NIDIS and NOAA, simply stating that you're, kind of willing to engage with us throughout the life of the project is enough. But when it comes to proposed end users, they do not have to be affiliated with NOAA, NIDIS, or a drought early warning system. So it's really up to you to kind of determine who the beneficiaries of the work would be, and then to include them. But that wouldn't necessarily be a role for NOAA or NIDIS staff. It could be, but it's not a requirement. That it would really depend on who your end users are, and I would actually. For the most part, I would think those would probably not necessarily be directly associated with NIDIS, potentially a management entity within NOAA, but it's probably more likely that they'll be, depending on the scale of your project, represent agencies and management entities within the geography of your project. Is there a required preferred format for the project narrative? So once you start developing your project and submitting it to Grants Online, you will have some direction to what certain pieces of the application and proposal will look like, but there's really not a preferred format. You'll have a page limit within the proposal for the project narrative, and what you include in the project narrative, graphs, figures, etc. There'll be in kind of further instructions in the notice of federal funding opportunity about what counts towards page limits and does not, but no, there's not a preferred format. There'll just be limitations to how long it can be. Are subawards allowed, or are separate applications the only route for multiple institutions to receive funding? Subawards are absolutely allowed, and if your institution is willing to do the subawards, then one application is fine. And yeah, so that's absolutely fine to do subawards. If entities on the project are only federal, do they each need to submit a copy of the application? If your PIs are only federal and they represent the same agency, so if they're all USGS or all NOAA, I'll just throw out a couple agencies, then one application is fine. Yeah, so that's fine. The only time we would need multiple no, it's fine. Yeah, one application is good, sorry. How the money moves is another discussion if the project is successful, but one application is fine for a federal agency. One more question. Do you view a funded project somewhere between a basic research project and applied sciences one, or leaning more towards solely applied science? So this is a good question, because I think there are needs in the community that require some research that's maybe one step away from being able to really deliver the applied tool. Those would be considered, but I think there needs to be a clear link to that project and how the outcome would translate. And just to be honest, and Meredith, I would appreciate you weighing in on this too, I think the challenge will be, given the applied nature of the competition and given that we saw a relatively large number of projects that are applied and that meet all the requirements in terms of getting information and products and services into the hand of end users. I don't know about how well that would compete against something that is at that closer to that end stage. But Meredith, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I don't know if this will be helpful, but there are other agencies that fund adaptation work. So we're not looking necessarily to fund that type of work. However, if there is basic, I wouldn't even say basic, not population biology of a species, et cetera, but if there is some type of, it's a fine line sometimes between basic and applied, but if there's some type of research that can help provide some tangible, actionable information that could then be utilized in that form by those who are going to be planning or developing adaptation processes or making other types of decision, then that would fit if you can demonstrate that. Yep. So I don't know, it's hard to talk in this, at a high level, but I think at this point, with this type of information we're sharing, hopefully you'll have a good idea of what exactly will hit the mark, and have a good sense of, you'll be competing against a number of strong proposals that are probably making a very strong connection to applied research. However, if there's a missing link and you can justify that and connect it somehow to actionable applied research that can be utilized by others, then that might fit in.
Yeah. And I would just say, refer back to those two key questions.
Yeah.
Given the guidance in the Notice of Federal Funding Opportunity, like you're going to have to be able, I think, to answer those two questions in order to compete well, given what we're seeing at the LOI stage. The next question is, where can we find the instructions for full proposals, including page limit, required items, etc.? So all of this is in the NOFO, the Notice of Federal Funding Opportunity, and Meredith has pasted the link to access that information in the chat box. So you have the information sheet that's specific to this competition, but then you have the overarching NOFO, which is where you're going to find all the guidance on how to apply. Let's see. Projects and partners and decision makers from relevant sectors should be part of an integrated project team. Do they need to be a co-PI of the team, or just being collaborators is fine? So just being collaborators is fine, and just makes it sound like they're lesser, but we look at those collaborators and their integration into the process of how you carry out the project as very important. So they do not need to be co-PIs, but listing them as collaborators and explaining to us how you will engage them will be really important. How should international partners and co-PIs be included? Are international subawards possible? This is a great question. I will double check the answer to this, but I think the answer is yes. I know we have had subawards to like subsidiaries that are international to institutions. So I will double check and respond via email to that question and just confirm that that is the case. So that is all the questions I'm seeing at this point. I'm going to go ahead and go through the last few slides, and then we'll come back to the question box and make sure we've covered everything. So if you still have questions on the feedback you received, I am offering 15-minute long meeting slots next week to discuss, and Meredith will put the link to schedule those in the chat box. And again, the discussion will focus on the fit of the competition. And not so much on, exactly how you carry out the project or the project focus, but I can speak with you a bit more about the fit of your specific LOI to the competition. So there's that scheduling link if you do want to schedule one of those 15-minute meetings. To wrap up, I want to focus on the full proposal submission. Full applications are due 5 p.m. Eastern on October 18 of 2021. And please, please, please remember that 5 p.m. Eastern, because submitting at 5 p.m. in whatever time zone you are, if it's late, there's no way we can take that proposal and evaluate it. So please make sure by 5 p.m. Eastern it is submitted. Please do not wait until the last minute to log in and submit to grants.gov. There can be challenges in getting your account set up and some of the basic information needed in order to apply. There can be, chinks in the system, but unless the whole system goes down, that will not be means for us to accept an application that comes in late. So please start early and access that system. I would say even a couple weeks in advance to start that process and make sure you have everything in place you need to submit the full proposal. And then be sure to read the full Notice of Federal Funding Opportunity completely and provide all the required information. And again, Meredith has put 2 places you can access that information into the chat box. I'll remind you that full proposal review will take place in 3 stages. The first will be an administrative review, just to ensure the complete application, that you've met all the requirements of, kind of not so much the competition, but the requirements of what needs to be included in your application in order for it to be reviewed. We will then hold 2 panels. The first will be an independent panel technical review. The second, an independent panel review for importance and relevance and applicability to the program goals and the competition. The first panel will be final weight of 60%, the second panel 40%, and a proposal needs to score at least a 3 out of 5 to move forward to that relevance panel. So just again, hammering home a reminder that resources can be found on the NOAA Climate Program Office website under funding opportunities, as well as drought.gov. Again, those are in the chat box, those links. And, you know, again, more links again to get you to the information you need, which obviously you've already found in order to put in an LOI, but just want to provide those to you again. A reminder that a recording of this webinar will be made available on drought.gov, and I will also send it to those of you who attended, and you can always contact me with any further questions or additional information needs. So with that, thank you for taking time to attend the webinar today. And if there are any final questions, I will go to the chat box and give you a couple minutes. Let's see if there's any final questions that have come through.
There's a few.
Yep. Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
That's okay. Can a full proposal be submitted if no LOI was submitted? Yes. So an LOI is not a requirement to submit a full proposal. So yes. Will applicants be notified if our proposals do or do not proceed through each of the 3 stages? We do not reach back out to you until the end of the competition to let you know if you have been successful or not. So we do not usually notify you at each of those 3 stages. And I will say that it's a long process, and I apologize for that, but it's, you know, it takes us months to go through that process, but there will be, if I remember correctly, we'll provide a date by which you should hear. And you can always reach out to me and kind of ask where things are in the process, but we don't do outreach at the end of each of those. And you're welcome. Just a thank you for offering the webinar and the additional information. So I'll give it another minute or two if there's any further questions. And I don't see any, but thank you again. And if you do choose to put in a full application for this competition, we wish you the best of luck through the process. And for those of you that are successful, we will very much look forward to working with you in the future on your project. So thank you again. I'll take one more look at the chat or the question box. I don't see anything coming in. So we'll go ahead and wrap up, and best of luck in putting together your full proposals. Thank you very much.